Hello, friends. Welcome to the Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's topic is Penske's State of Logistics, Leasing, Tech, and Loss Prevention with my friend Andy Moses. How's it going, Andy?
Joe, good to see you today. Things are going well.
I'm glad to finally get talking to you. We had some technical difficulty before we could get started here today. So, Andy, please introduce yourself and your company and where you're calling from today.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So, greetings to the audience. I am at the corporate headquarters of Penske Transportation Solutions. We're in lovely Reading, Pennsylvania. We've been headquartered here for about 55 years. And the company is made up of primarily two business units. One is our truck leasing and rental business unit that is operating from roughly 750, 800 locations across North America. And then these days, I'm specifically associated with our Penske Logistics business unit. And we operate in, again, across North America as well as Brazil. And we're in the business of providing logistics services for shippers in a variety of industries.
Yep. So when you're in your own logistics business, are you using Penske's trucks? Are you a brokerage? A little of both?
Joe, we do all the above and more. So ultimately, we have quite a footprint in the world of transportation and
Well,
logistics.
everyone knows that.
So it starts with we're a carrier, and so we're a dedicated carrier, one of the largest in the industry. And so in that business, we have probably 10 or 11,000 drivers on the road every day. We do a lot of middle mile type transportation, delivering to retail stores, convenience stores, quick service restaurants, hospitals, clinics. I could go on, but mostly sort of high value transportation. You mentioned brokerage. We are a freight broker as Penske Transportation Management. We are also a warehouse operator. And then at the end of the day, we are a 4PL and a 3PL. So when I say that, we are the lead logistics provider for a number of major shippers. And inevitably, Joe, it's combinations of these various services and capabilities that create a solution for a given customer. And that's my side of the business. I lead the solutions group here for Penske Logistics.
I'm an automotive guy originally, and I spent many years in that business. And you can't go to an automotive facility without seeing a whole bunch of Penske trucks. And before I got into the logistics side of the business, on the engineering side, and I used to always think, God, Penske must have a million trucks. And now I know a lot of them were leased, but not all of them. I'm assuming you had some of your own fleet there. So how can I tell the difference between your fleet and something you lease to somebody else? Or can I not tell the difference?
Yeah, there's a few flavors. And by the way, it's not a million, but it's around a 500,000, close to a 500,000 vehicles that we have in our realm. And so there's a few flavors. One, you will see an actual Penske rental vehicle. And so that could be a tractor, trailer, truck, van. We have a large rental fleet that we make available to businesses and also to consumers. Then we have vehicles that I would know going down the road because there's a tiny sticker about 2 inches by 3 inches on the side of the door cab that identifies the vehicle as a Penske vehicle. But what's behind it is a trailer, and that trailer typically has our customer's logo.
Right.
So that's where we're providing leasing services, and so it's the underlying customer's name that's plastered all over that trailer. And then finally, within this whole fleet, there's Penske Logistics, and so we're using Penske vehicles as well. We have our own distinctive color scheme, blue and white, and then you'll see our name on the door, Penske Logistics, and our DOT number.
Yep. So I know you have a few different customer segments, but who are the ideal customers for Penske?
Yeah, I would say it starts with anyone who has demanding customers. So if you're serving, um, if you're an automotive manufacturer and you're having to manage line haul deliveries into plant operations, if you're a convenience store chain and you need fresh product in every one of your stores by 4:30 in the morning, 365 days a year, that's a demanding customer. Maybe you're a door and window manufacturer, Joe, and you've got contracts with some of the big, like Home Depot or Lowe's are customers of yours, and your commitments are ironclad in terms of your service levels. These companies all become well suited to be customers of ours at Penske.
I love it. I love it. So, Andy, tell us a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Some career highlights before you joined the juggernaut that is Penske.
Yeah, sure, Joe. So I am from Brooklyn, New York, born and raised a city boy. And I had some early beginnings in the trucking industry before landing with Rollins Leasing, actually, in '85. So going back now 40 years. And Rollins was the third largest company in truck rental and leasing up until the day we were sold. Roger Penske and Brian Hart, who's still the president of Penske, walked into our conference room, introduced themselves. They were buying the company. That was in 2001. And so over the years, I had run sales and product organizations for Rollins. Penske stepped in and acquired us, and have been with them ever since. So it's been 25 years there as well. And boy, it's been a great ride. We've done a lot of good things as an organization.
Yeah. For those who are too young to remember, Roger Penske was a race car driver. And it took many years in, I think, before people started saying, oh no, he's a wildly successful entrepreneur. And I think there's young people who might listen to my podcast and go, oh, I know he's a race car driver. He was arguably the best race car driver. And everybody knew his name in that business. And now he's one of the most successful entrepreneurs, businessmen in the world.
Yeah, and I think there's a common thread across all of Roger's businesses, and generally that common thread is automotive. And so, if you think about it, obviously, we're Penske Racing is a legendary brand in
Yep.
motorsports with over 600 wins, 20 Indy 500 wins to our credit. And by the way, all 20 trophies and the driver's helmet are on display in a single display at our racing shop facility in Mooresville, North Carolina. So quite a place to visit. And then, so truck rental and leasing and logistics services is part of it. And then automotive retailing. So Penske Auto Group, PAG, publicly traded company, I think is we're the first or second largest auto retailer in the world, mostly luxury brands, over 400 dealerships. And so when you think about it, this all ties together, right? We're in partnerships with OEMs from a racing perspective. We're over here providing logistics services for them to help them manage their business. We're leasing and renting some of their trucks that they manufacture to a broad customer base. And then we're actually in dealerships. We're running dealerships where we're selling their vehicles on a retail basis. So it's quite an intertwined series of businesses, and Roger has been unparalleled in leveraging his knowledge, his relationships to really help everyone involved in this ecosystem grow and prosper. It's pretty remarkable to
Yeah,
watch.
yeah. My first year of college, I went to Northwood Institute, where a lot of people owned their dads owned auto dealerships. So some of my old roommates, they owned car dealerships and still owned car dealerships. And they always mentioned Penske for years. And I would always think that they were talking about some sort of race car thing. And then they go, oh, no, no. One of the Penske Auto Group, one of the largest. I was like, I had no idea. I always just thought leasing. I think that was, these companies from the outside, you get very one dimensional in your thinking, but there's a lot of tales to Penske business.
No
So
doubt.
anyway, I got a lot of talk to you about today. I wrote some notes down, so we could probably go in a whole bunch of different orders. But first and foremost, I want to talk about the scourge of our industry, which is not getting any easier, which is cybersecurity, freight fraud, and cargo theft. And I know they're probably all siblings or first cousins anyway. Um, it's a huge problem. And I've said many times on my podcast, I think that we're kind of at a place where people are going to start saying, rather than cost be the top priority, this is going to be the top priority. What's your 2 cents on this?
Joe, let's start with cybersecurity. Obviously, business continuity is critical for organizations. I look at the type of work we do running mission critical supply chains. And so, if you're going to take responsibility for critical elements of a Fortune 1000 company's supply chains, you've got to have your act together, and you've got to have redundant capabilities. We invest pretty heavily and we talk about it at a leadership level constantly, in capabilities to help us fend off the bad actors, and then, but if they penetrate, for the ability to respond and respond decisively. And so it's something that is a constant focus, and we have investments in staff and also partners of ours that help us in this regard. And so, and it's not a static area either.
No.
So there are new types of investments that have to be made, and so we're sort of continually scanning and evolving in this regard to protect the company and protect our
Yeah,
customers.
you said something I think is very interesting, which is the if you do get penetrated, and this is one of those very uncomfortable things that virtually anybody, any company can be, um, can be hacked, and it's a matter of how quickly can you get back to business, or how many hours do you lose, or is it days or weeks? And I went to the cybersecurity conference last year down in Cleveland, and a lot of the people who were there were being proactive. There were other people who were there because they'd been hacked, and uh, there's a lot of issues around it because no one wants to raise their hand and go, "Oh gosh, we were a little sloppy and we got hacked." Publicly traded companies, on the other hand, they have to. If there's a challenge, they have to raise their hand and say this happened. So, in the last few years, I think we've had AT&T got hacked. I won't mention all the logistics companies that have. It's public; people know who they are, but they all got hacked. I think we saw what was it? The airlines went down, and that wasn't a hack, but that was like a vulnerability of one of the technologies. So it can happen to virtually any company, even tech companies. So I don't think there's shame in it being hacked because companies like Penske, I bet there's a million threats a day that you're facing, and they only have to win one day, one time. And so I think we have to get over the fact that we could all be taken advantage of. But how do you recover? How do you make sure you haven't sacrificed too much in that loss?
I think there are technical means that we employ to be able to change
Yeah.
over quickly into other environments, from the affected environment. And so, so without sort of giving away some of the secret sauce, I think that's some of what we do, so that there's a way of flipping into another
Right.
operating environment, if you will, in that
Yeah.
regard.
The
So
bad guys don't
that's
listen to my podcast.
right.
um, I
Let's
will
hope
also
not.
say this, that I'm not saying this because Penske's a big company. I'm saying this is because it's reality. If you're trusting your logistics with a company that is too small to make the investments, you're making a mistake. And smaller companies can always partner with larger companies to try and have bigger shields, but the cost of the team and the investments that are necessary just aren't going to be capable. Smaller companies aren't going to be capable of making those investments. And that's why I think we're going to see more consolidation. I know that's not the topic today, but I can see that being one of the reasons bigger companies, I don't think just Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000. I think there's going to be lots of companies that say, hey, you either meet this high standard or I can't work with you because my boss's boss will kill me if he finds out what I did.
I think, Joe, it's changed the nature of how we do business to some extent. And what I mean by that is that the nature of buying teams within the organizations that we serve has evolved and changed. And so, while we primarily deal with the operational and procurement leaders of the organizations that we serve, um, they're bringing in financial folks and their own IT folks into these types of decisions. And so, while the finance and IT folks might not be focused on the nuts and bolts of our solution, they're focused on, okay, there's the physical movement of the goods. Now let's talk about the movement of the data associated with the goods. How secure is that? How do we get the data where it needs to go for the stakeholders that we're trying to serve? This is a lot of how our customers' buying environment has evolved. And so we're mindful that we're going to have to cater to and connect with some of these other constituencies within our
Yep.
customer
Yep.
organizations as they make these decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's a cybersecurity side. So cargo theft has become a huge issue, and it's a different kind of cargo theft. We've always had opportunistic cargo theft. Now we're starting to see sophisticated organized crimes, even organized crime people, even the cartels involved in cargo theft. Now I know a big chunk of it is in California, but people told me at a conference I was recently at CSCMP, and somebody said, Joe, they pick out which rail car has the high value goods, whether it's Xbox. I don't know if Xboxes go by by that or not, but they know the rail car, they know the truck. And I think the real risky point for a truck driver now is the first 250 miles. I don't think we ever thought about somebody gets in a truck and takes off from a facility and somebody's following you. And I don't think I've ever heard a truck driver say, oh, yeah, I have to pay attention. And I think the first 250, 300 miles is the risky area. And I keep thinking, that's like Detroit to Chicago. Imagine somebody just trailing you 4.5 hours. But if you got the high value goods and they think you're going to stop and go to the bathroom, you're going to get out of your truck, I'm going to take advantage. That I think is brand new business in our space.
It's pretty unbelievable. You probably read recently the article about Guy Fieri.
Yes,
Who,
I did a podcast on it.
exactly, right. Because you're really okay. There you go. And so that gets your attention. It's a load of tequila, presumably a very marketable type thing. And and you get into the realm of mostly freight brokerage. So when you think about direct relationships between shippers and carriers, if your processes are pretty good, you should be much less vulnerable in this regard because you're dealing with the same carriers. They know your operating environment, and you're capturing a trailer number in a TMS system and things like that. Now you get into the realm of working with freight brokers who may be sending any carrier in to your
Yes.
operating location on any given day, and the requirements of managing that sensitively and thoughtfully are ratcheted up, I believe. And so that's some of what goes with that domain
Yeah.
for
And for
sure.
those of you who didn't pay attention to it, Guy Fieri, I call him Fieri like you do, but somebody said, no, it's Fieri. That's the Italian one. Guy Fieri,
Ah,
he's diners, drive-ins, and dives. He's a chef. He's on TV. He's a very, very interesting guy. Him and Sammy Hagar own a tequila company. They lost $1 million. And from what I understand, the truck drivers picked it up and took it to the location that they were told to deliver to. So they didn't realize they were participating in a theft. And that's so it's just, this isn't somewhere where somebody came in guns a blazing to steal $1 million worth of goods. This is this is truck drivers who did their normal job, picked up the load, dropped it off. Unfortunately, they dropped it off at a place where it wasn't supposed to be dropped. So somebody got into the systems and basically tricked everybody, the truck drivers, the shipper, and thank God they came forward, because I think a lot more people now are saying, "Oh, if it can happen to them, it can happen to me."
clearly. Let me give you a sense of the kinds of resources that it takes to combat this sort of thing or attempt to get out ahead of it. So I'll start with law enforcement, and so firms with the scale that Penske has commonly these days employ folks with a law enforcement background, ex-FBI type people, and so on and so forth. So you have people like that as part of your team. Then we have loss prevention specialists, people that are focused on safety of equipment. They're focused on the safety of inventory in warehouses that we operate. And so there's a whole set of processes and things that folks like that manage and help us deploy across our organization. Then there's tech. And so the underlying technology is important as well, so that there are safeguards within your operating environment that will not allow you to tender a load in the system to a carrier that's not qualified that day in the system. And so you can have a carrier that's qualified today, but tomorrow their insurance lapses, or tomorrow their
Yep.
operating authority is revoked, or whatever might happen. These are just some examples of the kinds of things that have to be in place. And in our case, we do have the scale to support some of these kinds of things. And at the end of the day, like you say, I mean, shippers want to align themselves with providers that have um, their house in
Right.
order, so that because all these things are cancers that eat away at the effectiveness of supply chains.
Oh yeah.
They distract teams, they cost money, and they're not good for business. So having your ducks in a row in this regard
Yep.
is critical in today's
And
environment.
I've had a number of cybersecurity people on the podcast over time, and I've heard them use terms like hygiene, which is very boring. It's doing the blocking and tackling, which is okay. The following 10 people quit the company or got let go from the company. Get rid of their email address. Get rid of their access today. Don't let some hacker find that and get into your system. And then there's all those phishing attacks. I get them every other day. I get some, and some of them are getting very convincing. And I think one of the latest scams is the QR code thing, where they send a package to your house. This isn't exactly trucking, but they send a package to your house and it's got a QR code. So you hit the QR code and now it's in your phone. And basically, basically, anytime you click on those QR codes that are suspect, you're in trouble. And boy, we can all make that mistake. And that mistake can happen at work. And I think you have to develop a culture of uh, we got to warn everybody, but when there is a mistake made, please raise your hand and let us know that I think I hit the wrong link. please, please tell me I didn't ruin anything. And I think that's what we have to get to, because this is a threat that gets better every single day. They're using AI, their messages improve, the look of their emails improve, and that's just on the cyber stuff. Who knows what on the other side?
And you're right, and you have to be relentless. I think about the culture here of our organization, and at its foundation, we are renting trucks. And so there's a whole homeland security aspect
Yes.
of things that we do and processes that we lead. And I think that's the kind of mentality that's sort of woven through the organization. So it extends in a lot of different directions. We have Cybersecurity Week, where we're all getting messages continually from the cybersecurity team, doing exactly what you just did. Like I hadn't really heard or thought much about QR codes, and I appreciate you bringing it to my attention because that'll stay in the back of my mind. So we do a lot of that sort of thing to try and stay one step ahead of the bad guys.
Yes, yes. And I'm gonna. This is just a wild thought, but I think there's something behind it. Uh, some of the challenge with all this began when we started automating stuff, and the automation that we have, we all want it. I want to be able to match a truck to a driver, a driver to a load easily. I don't want to have to make all those phone calls and send emails. So it makes sense, but I'm never going to be defrauded by the guy who I talk to on the phone once a month. And I've known him for years. I talk to Andy all the time. He gets me a truck. Good guy. We talk about football, we talk about fishing, and he's never going to defraud me. Now, I think there's people, especially in this market, who cut corners. They're like, this guy doesn't have a good website. Uh, he only likes to text. He doesn't like to talk on the phone, but he's $30 cheaper. That's the wrong wrong decision, and you know it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it becomes a question for the shipping organization of who gets in my routing
Yeah,
guide and how. And for the sake of a nickel a mile, am I cutting a corner that could come back and
right.
bite me? And so I would say the smart shippers are good partners with providers like us together at combating some
Yeah.
of these things.
I'm like a
So
broken record on some of this. I've said this before on my podcast, but oh, a few months ago, somebody called me and he says, "Hey, I'm in Miami. I've got like 50 truckloads of stuff that's got to come out of the port." And he goes, I'm hoping you can recommend somebody. And I go, "Oh, yeah." And then he goes, it's got to be a small broker. He goes, "I don't want to work with anybody big." And I would go, "Okay." Didn't think too much of it. I was excited because I'm going to hand off 50 loads to a friend. So I called my buddy, said, "Hey, Tyler, you should take these." And the next day I was at breakfast. It was a Saturday morning. And I thought, look at that. I looked that up, looked at the guy's website, and I was like, this is a little too generic. So I called friend and I said, "Hey, make sure your guys check that one out. I'm not so sure it's legit." Sure enough, it wasn't. And I was so excited to hand this off. And who doesn't want to get 50 shipments, 50 loads? I mean, we're all, I was thinking, you owe me lunch, dude. And instead, I'm bringing him bad news. And what hit me was when he said, I want to work with a small broker. Why? Because a small broker might cut corners that a big broker won't, that a big carrier won't. And that's the crazy easy way that it can happen. And again, I almost was part of it. I'd owed him lunch if I did that to him. Anyway, next thing I want to talk about, speaking of cutting corners, it has not been the best market since, I don't know, 1989, I guess. No, I'm thinking it's 4 years. Somebody said 3.5, somebody else said 4 years. And I used to always ask people, when's it going to end? And I don't think anyone has that exact answer, but I know you guys have a lot of resources. So talk about the state of the market.
Yeah, I think what weighs on me the most when I think about the market is what's happened with the cost side of the equation for carriers. So the rate side of the equation is just one piece of it, and then there's the cost side. And so as you think about the cost side, um, insurance, issues with nuclear verdicts, so the costs related to that keep going up for carriers. Maintenance, equipment, costs keep rising. And so as we've been in a static or declining rate environment for these 3 or 4 years now, costs have continued to go up. And so those are two lines that you don't that have to intersect if you're going to have success realistically. And so while we've been in a flattish volume environment of freight and a flattish rate environment, costs have continued to rise, which has really put pressure on a lot of carriers of all sizes, but in particular small and mid-sized carriers. And so that weighs on us heavily as we survey the landscape, and it's put a lot of pressure on some folks. Now, the big players will tell you, well, this is going to help drive capacity out of the market and create more equilibrium, which we're probably expecting to see, whether it's late in 26 or beyond. So that's some of what we're talking about currently in this regard.
Yeah, I talked to Doug Shire. He's over at McLeod. He said something to me that I hadn't heard before, and I'd love to hear your 2 cents on it. He said we used to have the ability to take trucks off the road and sell them in a secondary market in Asia and Africa. And um, he says now they don't seem to be doing that as much. And he goes, and I believe some of the all the technology we put on a lot of our trucks makes them a harder sell to Asia or Africa because they say, hey, what is all this information? What is all this tech on here? And he said, so there hasn't been the armies leaving the field, so to speak, as we traditionally have had. Is that there? Have you seen any of that?
I mean, there could be. I mean, at the end of the day, um, it's a supply and demand issue with used equipment. It's also how used equipment is priced relative to new
Yep.
equipment. That's going to drive some of what goes on in that market. And so I tend to focus quite a bit on the driver side of the equation as well. And that's become a hot topic of late. So um, when I think about the most frenzied part of the freight market, probably in 20 latter half of 2021,
Yep.
through 2022, we had a legitimate shortage of qualified drivers, which has an immediate effect on the market. I would say since then, carriers and private fleets alike have found it easier. I would never characterize it as easy to find highly qualified professional truck drivers. It's still not easy today, but it's not like it was in the sort of frenzied moments there of 21 and 22. Now we have all this activity with the government looking at the driver's licenses of immigrants
Yep.
and so on. And that's a hot topic. I mean, I just read something today that The California DOT, maybe there was something like 17,000 drivers that they were going to be revoking their licenses, which this is a meaningful shift in what's happening in the market. So if the driver population tightens up, that's going to have an impact on this whole imbalance capacity
Right.
demand situation we've been in for a few
Yeah,
years.
but uh, correct me as I go astray. I should stay in the shell end on some of these topics. Um, we train a lot of drivers. It's not impossibly hard to train drivers, but we lose the drivers out of this business. And I'm going to suggest that it's a difficult job. And if you're willing to do that job, there's a lot of other people who will have you in other industries, whether it be construction or warehousing or you name it. So we tend to train people, and then for a long time, I would always hear we have a truck driver shortage, and then other people would say, well, we don't utilize them very well. They're driving 6 hours a day instead of 11, and they go somewhere else. We lose them because we don't have the right type of work.
Clearly, there are a lot of different types of driving jobs, and so the most of the front page stuff when we talk about drivers, people are talking about long haul
Yep,
trucking. I would say so, which is working in a sleeper
tough.
tractor, being out on the road 3, 4, 5 nights a week. That's always been in recent years, last 10 years at least, the most strained portion of the market. We've been engineering solutions around that for years. And so, do we handle long haul freight? Absolutely, we handle long haul freight, but it's handled in a way that the drivers tend to be home every night. So, you have relays,
There you go.
we have more complex networks that we run than what was common in the past. And so there's a lot of things that we do to make driving jobs great jobs, and that's just one of them,
Yeah,
Joe.
and so those relays, am I right to say so? If I was in Detroit and you were in New York, we would meet halfway. I take your truck back to Detroit, and you take my truck back to New York, and is that how it works?
It does. And at the end of the day, you're going to go about 240 or 250 miles in one direction and then turn
Yeah,
around and come back. Because that's about what you can do illegally in a day. And so that's how these relay networks are going to be set up. When you look at a company like Penske, we have such a facilities footprint all over the place that we have secure places for these drivers to meet up and exchange trailers. And it just helps us do this professionally and appropriately. So that's just one of the examples of ways that we attract people. And because truck drivers are unlike, they're no different than anyone else. They've got family, they've got soccer games, they've got commitments, and they want to know what that schedule is going to be. And so there's a lot of these jobs that are very attractive within the
right.
broad pool of trucking. And then there's a less attractive portion, and a lot of what you read in the press probably is touching on that less attractive.
Well, there seems like the owner operators, especially if you're near a port. I remember during COVID, there was guys who would wait at a port for 6 hours, run out of hours, and go home and not get paid for 1 minute of that day. And obviously, that's a bad job. You're going to quit after a while if you're doing that. But the bigger companies, a company like Penske, can do that. You have the resources to say we're going to optimize this, and we got enough of a density and enough freight in our system that we can make that work. Not everybody can.
And no, and there's a career path as well for drivers. So it's not uncommon, and I won't age discriminate here, I guess, in my comments, but it's not uncommon for people at a certain stage in their career to want to really hustle, take on more difficult work, and maybe enjoy greater pay. And I would associate that with making 10 or 15 stops a day in a vehicle, maybe delivering to convenience stores and on a route. Very physical work,
Yep.
helping get the freight
Oh,
off
and
the
you're in
vehicle and so
traffic
on.
too.
Yes, and as someone moves through their career, they may find that, you know what, I'm not up for that anymore. I just want to bump docks. I want to go from point A to point B and back, and I want to be home at the same time every night. So the career path, like any other industry, matters a ton. And so we've been very successful at having these career path conversations with drivers and helping them move through. And I'm thrilled to share with you that about 100 feet down the hall from me here is what I call our wall of fame. It's all the drivers that have 10, 20, 25, 30 years of accident-free driving that we honor once a year in a banquet here in Reading, and just did it recently. And when you sit down over dinner with some of these folks, that's part of the story they tell. Hey, I've been with 4 or 5 different Penske customer accounts over the years. I used to do this work, now I moved to that work. And so this career path has been meaningful for us. And we're pretty
Right,
proud of it.
right. So getting back to the state of the market, the drivers are definitely part of it, and we're seeing maybe the English proficiency push some people out, some people who are driving who shouldn't be driving. You think that will tend to make this a little more profitable for the carriers?
I think ultimately some series of events are going to come together that are going to cause freight rates to start to rise
Hallelujah.
at a certain point. It's rare for them to be depressed for this extended period of time. So capacity coming out of the market, but also the demand equation. So at a certain point, that series of all this work by the administration to move more manufacturing to the states will create more freight on our roads. So the demand side of the equation is also, I think, going to be, a driver
Right.
of the change.
And I think it's
Yes.
also going to force us to make this a better job, make sure it is a good job, because otherwise, if you don't have a good job for that driver, and he says, you know what, I'll go build a data center, I'll go work in a new manufacturing facility. And the new manufacturing facilities are not like the old ones; they're a lot nicer to work in. And yeah, we have to make this a great job. So one of the other things when we're talking about state of the market, so every once in a while somebody will talk to me on the podcast about consolidation. I know it's slowed down a little bit in the last quarter or two, but that's been hot. And so when we talk about consolidation, not just the carriers, but also the freight brokerages, it seems like a bigger chunk of the business has moved to the top 1,000. So if there's 25,000 freight brokers, the top 1,000, I think, do 80%. And for just the reasons we've been talking about, density, the investments in security, um, being able to get drivers and keep them happy. You know, happy drivers are good drivers. And so, talk about that consolidation that's happening in the market over the last couple of years.
Certainly, as you have to look at technology, and AI is a prominent discussion these days. It's just the latest technology to influence this. But at the end of the day, there's a flow of information that's very meaningful to shippers. And it's getting information regarding the movements of freight back to key stakeholders in their organizations in places where they want to consume it. It's having the capability of flagging things on a predictive basis that may be about to go wrong and pointing supervisors in the direction of resolving those before they come disruptive. There's a series of things in this regard, and so there are going to be, I think, fewer players that can really step up to that sort of thing. Will there always be a place in our economy for basic trucking, basic warehousing at a fair price? I would say yes.
Right.
Um, but I think the major shippers, those with complex supply chains, they're going to need to rely, they're going to want to rely on partners that can play in the data game
Right.
with them, and that takes scale. And I think that's some of what makes this consolidation
Yep. I
likely.
worked in automotive for a long time, and there was a time, I think it was interior trim for Ford Motor Company, where they had 1,000 suppliers. They were all over the place, all over the Midwest, down to the South. And then one day they said, we're going to have 300 interior trim suppliers. And was like, you can't. And they did. And so some suppliers became tier two. And then they said, now we're going to go down to 60. And everyone's like, you can't. And then they went to 12, then to six, then to three. Now I think they've loosened that up. Maybe there's 10. But the idea of working with every ma and pa that makes a little plastic part throughout the world, they didn't want that anymore. They wanted to say, hey, when we move to China or Europe, we're going to take JCI or Magna with us. We don't want to ask a little mom and pop company to support us overseas. It doesn't make sense. I can see the same thing happening with the biggest shippers, as you said. There'll always be small shippers who say, I like working with my buddy Bob. He's got 2 trucks, which is fine. I have 1 shipment a week. Fine. You're not at a giant risk. If you're Procter and Gamble, you have risk with your supply chain. It's complex and it's massive, and people depend on it.
And you've got a team that is continually working on important projects for your organization. And when things in the day to day transactional realm go wrong, all that work stops. Now they're focused on a few shipments that day that should have gone right but didn't go right. And it takes them away from the developmental work that these companies would like their staffs to be doing as it relates to their supply chain. So disruptions are costly, and so um, situating your network to minimize that stuff. That's the stuff we talk about every day with our
Yep.
customers.
So do you guys have a report? I have a note here that you guys have a report on the state of the market.
We do. We have two actually, and these are things that we're a long-term player in the industry. So these are reports that we sponsor. The first is the Council of Supply Chain Management's State of Logistics report, which is in the I think it was the 35th edition this year. It gets launched in June each year. The report is actually researched and written by Carney,
Okay.
and and we fund it, so it's not a Penske report, but we do fund it in support of the industry, and we're pretty proud of it. So we launch it every year, typically at the National Press Club down in D.C. or some venue, and the press comes in, and the report gets launched, and the industry then gets access to all the details. So that's one sponsorship we have. The other is there's a 3PL study, which is a study of how shippers and third party logistics providers are working together. And that one is written these days by NTT. Some of their staff does the research and the writing of the report. And in conjunction with Penn State, Joe,
All
Dr. Langley,
right.
Dr. Langley from Penn State, who's a friend of the industry and certainly a friend of Penske, that he works together with NTT. We finance the report, and it gets
Talk to
launched.
the supply chain guys over at Penn State. They've been on the podcast and they'll be on again. I'll make sure, Andy, that I put a link to your LinkedIn profile, link to your website, any other links you and their go to market team give me, I'll put in the show notes along with those two reports. So people who are listening to this podcast can go click on the show notes and get that. Um, Next thing I want to talk to you about is there's this, you guys are unique in the business in that you lease out a lot of trucks. And I think a lot of people say, yeah, that's where it starts and ends. Not where it starts and ends for Penske. You guys are also in the logistics business. Talk about the crossover of those business and why it is advantageous to your customers that you're in multiple spaces.
Yeah, I think there's going to be movements in the way businesses elect to manage their transportation over time. And so there are periods of time, or it may be just at specific operating locations, where a company feels like the best choice for us is to have our own fleet of vehicles and our own drivers, in which case they probably still don't want to mess around with maintenance.
Right.
And you mentioned the complexity of the equipment we're operating these days. So we have a tremendous expertise in fleet maintenance to support that. Now you may have other operating locations, or perhaps you find your fleet is most effective on your local or perhaps some elements of your regional freight, but there's certain freight that's tougher to handle, and you want to bring in a third party to handle that. Now you may have a dedicated fleet that can operate side by side with your private fleet. We tend to serve market leaders as customers, Joe, and we found over the years that customers will slide back and forth along that continuum of ways of doing this. Our pitch has always been, we just want you to do it with us, and
Right.
so whatever's best for you, we're in a position to support it, and that's been good for the company over the years, and really good for our customers
Yeah,
as
there's
well.
always going to be a time, especially for big shippers, where they say, oh, I need an extra 4 trucks this month. I don't need them next month. Well, you're working with Penske. It's like, yeah, it's no big deal. And also, you do the dedicated. So it can be their logo on the side and it looks like their truck and it's rolling down the street, but it's Penske managing everything else.
That's right, and it does a number of things for them. First of all, they hire an expert team. And so when you think about running an operation, so there's continual redesigns that have to take place. Maybe your business is seasonal. A good example is we take care of a big convenience store chain up and down the East Coast. Well, the beach in the summer their volumes change dramatically, right? And so you've got to be able to respond to that. You may also have longer haul segments to your network, and it's economically prudent to have backhauls in those freight lanes. And there again, we've got the resources and the team to go support and do all that stuff. So there's a variety of complementary capabilities, staffing, the ability to attract and retain great drivers. That might cause companies to look at someone like us and say, yeah, this is the right path for us at dedicated fleet.
Yep. So I want to wrap this up, but before we wrap this bad boy up, I want to kind of hit one more time the problems you solve and who you solve them for.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, for us, it's all about accelerating supply chain performance. And so our customers are in food and beverage, they're in automotive, they're in industrial manufacturing, they're in healthcare, they're in paper or publishing. So they're in a variety of industries. They're looking for partners that have knowledge of the logistics practices that support their industry. So food logistics is totally different than auto logistics or healthcare logistics. So you've got to have depth in the areas where you look to serve, and we certainly have that. Being able to provide services across the span of the supply chain. So whether it's design and planning, inbound, that make stage of the supply chain where orders are transformed into finished goods. That could be manufacturing a vehicle, that could be kitting shampoo and cream rinse together in a warehouse that gets into a retail store. There's that whole outbound piece. And then, of course, more and more, Joe, returns, reverse
Yeah.
logistics.
God.
Being able to provide capability across the span of the supply chain and then being able to do so in a way that is targeted for best practices at their industry and then being able to do so at scale geographically. These are all some of the sort of key ingredients to success.
So are your warehousing, do you do e-commerce out of those warehousing, or is it more kind of B to like B2B? What is the kind of, or do you have multiple?
We do a lot of B2B, and typically, anytime you have B2B, there's probably a direct to consumer component. And so we support the direct to consumer component as well. And I would say, so it's sort of all the above. Um, and, um, uh, and typically, what we do in warehouses is often linked to what we do in transportation. Um, right. And so as you think about orders and order fulfillment, having one party responsible from the receipt of an order all the way through the movement of the freight through a warehouse and then on into final mile delivery. This is the span that, so some customers find it attractive to have one party that does all that for them, and
Right.
we're pretty well
Now, they
situated.
used to say in the olden days that it'd be one throat to choke, but now it's one back to pat.
It could be some of both on any given day, Joe.
Of course. Um, yeah, I love what you guys are doing. And again, I don't say this because Penske's huge, but I do feel like there is consolidation is happening because of some of the issues we talked about today. And I do think, if you and I today were uh, at a shipper and somebody said, hey, go pick the right partner. First, we're going to start with like, first off, let's not get our stuff stolen. That is our top priority because the boss isn't going to like that. And then I'm going to say, let's make sure we have the capacity and the safeties become more and more important. And I think also, I didn't say it today, but I say it all the time, is I do believe we're headed for like a cyber 9/11 or a digital 9/11. Let's make sure we're not part of that. Uh, it's it's there's a good reason that the top half of the market is growing faster than the bottom half of the market, whether it's in trucking or in brokerage. Not so much leasing. I don't even know how many companies are in leasing other than Penske. It's not a big space.
We didn't talk about safety much, but safety is more important than ever, both to avoid disruptions, obviously to save lives, but in the wake of the nuclear
Oh,
verdicts that are
yes.
affecting the trucking and transportation industry, being on the right side of that from a process point of view, being diligent with executing our stated processes. This is all, I think, part of what makes us great, and we'll have to continue down this path in the future for
Yeah.
sure.
Those nuclear verdicts obviously horrible. I heard somebody say this not so long ago that the companies that are, you see it oftentimes, you'll see in freight waves or one of the news, hey, these guys are third generation trucking company getting rid of their trucks, keeping their brokerage, getting rid of their trucks, keeping their warehouses. And it tells you they're never getting rid of the warehouses and keeping the trucks. That's It tells you this is a very difficult business. But somebody pointed this out not too long ago. They said compliance is super important in this business, obviously, but they said it's almost become uh, a challenge because the companies that are compliant have a cost basis that is higher. And I think I've heard some people say this on the podcast is we're never the lowest price, but we're safe and we share your values, and that matters. Right now, I don't think you should be, if you're a shipper right now listening, I don't think you should be saying, hey, I hope they can get 10% cheaper than that. That is not the right question to ask right now.
Yeah, and I'll go back to where we started. You asked me, what types of companies do we serve, and I said it's ones with demanding customers. And so we found it prudent to be more in the service sensitive side of our markets over the
Yes.
decades, because folks who have strong businesses that are market leaders that are serving demanding customers have a different view than the commodity portion of freight markets, where someone might be tempted to just, I'm going to gravitate towards the lowest price,
Yeah.
which may not be the best cost in the long run, but they may
Yeah,
gravitate towards that. So
well,
yeah,
again, this is, I believe, there's some cost, there's some corner cutting going on, and I think there's companies, if you're whether you're a brokerage or a small carrier, where they say, "God, I'm going to cut that corner because we're not making payroll this week. I got to figure out a way to keep this thing going." And I think that's I feel for them. It's a bad feeling, but it's not right for the customer in the long run. Anyway, I'm going to summarize what we talked about. Then I want to get your final thoughts on the topic. So I'm talking to Andy Moses. We're talking Penske's state of logistics, leasing, tech, and loss prevention. So we talked first about loss prevention. Same old story here, guys. Cybersecurity, freight fraud, cargo theft. They're all first cousins. They're all horrible, and it's not getting better. Uh, we're seeing a rise in the strategic cargo theft. So this is the guys who will follow you 200, 300 miles because they know you have Xbox in the back of your truck. Truckers have eyes in the back of their head now, in addition to all the other challenges they have. But you brought up a few points is that ultimately you want a partner who can manage all of the hits that we're all going to get and make sure that the business continuity is always there. So if you do get hacked, you say, we're able to say you lost nothing. There's nothing sacrificed. You're still doing business, and you have to redundant capabilities. Um, that means you're spending extra money, and I think this is the unfair part of our business. The people who have the redundant capabilities, who spend extra for the proper hygiene, you don't always get credit for it until the D-Day when something happens wrong across the whole market. So you need a partner who can make the investments to prevent all this loss. Next, we talked about state of the market. Same old thing, still down. As you said, they can't last forever. But you guys have two interesting reports. I'll make sure I put a link to those. So anyone who wants to check out those links can check out the state of the market. We talked about this crossover a few times of the truck leasing and logistics and how that gives you guys a unique perspective in the market and unique capabilities in the market. And what else? And I think you said something that I thought was interesting. It's just this: you guys are all about accelerating supply chain performance, and I keep thinking, yep, that's what it's all about at the end of the day. So, anyway, put a big old bow on this one. Final thoughts on the topic, Andy Moses.
I'll talk a little bit about the company here, and so going on 40 years with
You
Penske.
started as a child, I'm assuming.
I'm pretty darn young, Joe. Yeah, I'm still young, but not as young as I was 40 years ago. But I've never lacked for any of the resources necessary to succeed in any role that I've had over the years. And so you think about the company, we have a great employment brand. So we're able to go out and attract and retain some of the best people out there in the market. I would say over the years, no good idea goes unfunded at Penske, and so we're very strong financially, probably conservative, but we're strong financially, and we have the wherewithal to do big things and make investments, and so you're not really searching for funding. And then I would say just the focus of the business has stayed very simple over many years, decades really. And that's just taking care of customers and taking care of our associates. If you take care of your associates, they're going to take great care of your customers. One doesn't need a more complicated formula than that. It's worked really well for us. And so when you put it all together, I've always felt that, well, there's no excuses if you're an executive at a firm like Penske. You've got all the resources you might ever want to get things done. So go out and get it done. And yeah, we've had some fun doing
I
that.
love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for taking the time and going well over my time today. I know you're a busy man, so thank you so much for taking the time.
Great chatting today, Joe. Appreciate it. Thanks for the
Yep.
podcast.
And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support's very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward. You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.